3.3b is on the normal curve. So we want to be able to know what the normal curve is and use it to interpret situations. So here's the normal curve. It's kind of this bell-shaped curve. It has the mean directly in the middle, and notice that it is symmetric around the mean. Remember, symmetric means the left side is identical to the right side. Each interval, they're different colors, is 1 standard deviation away. So this is 1 standard deviation below, this is 1 standard deviation above. Okay, so this would be 2 standard deviations below. This is 2 standard deviations above, and then last but not least, this would be 3 standard deviations below and 3 standard deviations above. So each of those intervals represents a standard deviation. The total area underneath our curve is 1 or 100%. So from end to end, it all adds up to be 100%. Okay, so the first thing we want to do is memorize these percents. So from the first standard deviation below to the first standard deviation above, that represents 68% of our data. 68%. Then from 2 standard deviations below to 2 standard deviations above, that represents 95% of all our data. And from 3 standard deviations to 3 standard deviations, that's 99.7%. So the first step anytime you have a problem with the normal curve should be to write or label these percents: 68%, 95%, and 99.7%. You will need to memorize them, and labeling them for each problem will help with that. So here's our normal curve again. Just to reiterate, so this is 68%. From here to here represents 95% of our data. Okay, so this would be 2 standard deviations below, and this is 2 standard deviations above. Okay, that first one was 1 standard deviation below and 1 standard deviation above. And then 3 standard deviations, this is 99.7% of our data. So again, from here to the middle would be 3 standard deviations below and 3 standard deviations above. And that's our normal curve. Okay, and then another reminder that mean or the average of your data is in the middle. So let's go ahead and let's practice some problems. So notice the first thing I did was label my percent: 68, 95, 99.7%. In basketball, Mike has a mean score of 16 points and a standard deviation of 2 points. Given this information, fill out the normal curve below. So looking at the problem, we know that our mean is 16 and our standard deviation is 2. So remember, the mean goes in the middle. So the first thing we're always going to do is label our mean. So 16 goes right in the middle. Okay, well then to fill out our chart, since our standard deviation is 2, we are going to add 2 when going to the right and subtract 2 when going to the left. So 1 standard deviation above 16 would be adding 2, and that would leave us with 18. 1 standard deviation below 16 would be subtracting 2, and that would leave us with 14. So that tells us 68% of the points Mike scores fall between 14 and 18. Okay. Then to keep going, we would keep adding 2, that would be 20. Add 2, that would be 22. To keep filling out the left, we would keep subtracting 2. That would be 12. Subtract 2, that would be 10. So now we know what each of our intervals represents. So now that we have our normal curve filled out, we can answer some questions. So between how many points does Mike score 68% of the time? Well, looking at our curve, from right here to right here is 68% of the time. So this area represents 68% of the time, and we can see that that's 14 to 18. So 68% of the time, Mike scores between 14 to 18 points. Well, between how many points does he score 95% of the time? So we're going to look at 95%. Well, that's from here to here, so that would be all of this area in the orange. Okay, and if we look, well, that would be 12 to 20. So 12 to 20 points 95% of the time. And that's our normal curve. Let's look at a couple more examples. On a recent math test, the mean score was 75 and the standard deviation was 5. So now would be a good time to pause and see if you can fill out the standard deviation and the mean on the normal curve. Remember, your mean goes in the middle, so here's our 75. Since our standard deviation is 5, we're going to add 5 and we're going to subtract 5. So 75 plus 5 would give us 80, plus another 5 would give us 85, plus another 5 would give us 90. Then when we subtract, we'd have 70, 65, and 60. And those are our different percents. What percent of students scored between 70 and 80? So here's 70, and here's 80. So looking at it, it looks like that is our interval of 68%. So we would say that 68% of students scored between 70 and 80. Well, what percent of students scored between 85 and 90? Here's 85. Here's 90. So we're just looking at this area from 95% to 99.7%. Well, from 95% to 99.7%, right? That's the difference between 95 and 99.7. So these two areas would represent the difference between 95 and 99.7. So that would be about 4.7, but our area is just half of that, right? So half of that would be half of 4.7. So that leaves us with about 2.35% scored between 85 and 90. Okay. So that is how we fill out our normal curve and answer questions about it. Let's answer one more question. In an Oreo factory, the mean mass of cookie is 40 grams. For quality control, the standard deviation is 2 grams. So the mean is 40, standard deviation is 2. Again, it'd be a good idea to pause the video and see if you can fill out the curve for yourself. Our mean goes in the middle. We add 2 going to the right. We subtract 2 going to the left. And that's our normal curve. We actually have a different question to answer for this one. So it says, if 10,000 cookies were produced, how many cookies are within 2 grams of the mean? So here's our mean at 40. Within 2 grams would be everywhere from 38 to 42. So it would be everywhere from 38 to 42. Well, notice that 68% of the cookies are between 38 to 42. So that means 68% of 10,000 cookies are within 2 grams of the mean. So how do we figure that out? Well, we take 0.68 times 10,000, and that tells us that 6,800 cookies fall within 2 grams of the mean. And that's our answer. So this is our normal curve. Right? It's this symmetric curve with our mean in the middle. And then you want to memorize these percents: 68%, 95%, 99.7%.